Xenologue is the final wave of Fire Emblem DLC that once again promises a unique side story, remixed game mechanics, and a focus on fixed inventories and character creation. The prospect of your units being pre-built with experience and levels being non-existent might turn some RPG aficionados off, but for strategy junkies such as myself, working within a set of resources and creatively problem-solving with the limited tools at your disposal is the core of what deviates Fire Emblem from every other JRPG on a grid. In theory, having set classes, set levels, and set inventories means that developers can create more finely tuned challenges within the content of the game's map design. Unfortunately, Xenologue doesn't achieve any of that. Like all the DLC in Fire Emblem Engage, its integration is gawkishly implemented, to a point where it becomes antithetical to what post-launch downloadable content should facilitate, and in my opinion, makes the game less replayable and less fun to come back to as a result. If you paid $30 for this DLC, you have been swindled. So anyways, let's get into the good. The story is very compelling. Sure, seeing the anti-versions of all your favorite royals is the main draw initially, but beyond that, there are some great plot twists and reveals that I genuinely didn't see coming. Made all the more impactful because the narrative and premise was so well established and just made sense. It's very impressive for a story that's only 6 chapters, but what I really appreciated was the ludonarrative implementation. I'm gonna keep it vague for the sake of not spoiling the plot. There are many gameplay design choices that seem odd at first, but are actually consistent with the story being told. The plot will open up and explain the reasoning behind those quirks eventually, but I thought it was a very clever and subtle method of world building. The exclusive new music to Xenologue is awesome, and in my opinion better than anything found in the main campaign. The aesthetics and graphics of the map are fantastic. The difficulty of the campaign is selectable and separate from your main file, meaning if you're using a maddening file, you can play Xenologue on normal or hard, which is nice. So let's get to the bad. This game feels unplay tested in literally every difficulty. Normal is so easy you can auto-battle most of it. Even the later maps, enemies will constantly do single digit to 0 damage, and anything above that is absurdly difficult, even hard mode. This is coming from someone who played through the entire game without bond or emblem rings. Full disclosure, I started on maddening for the first 3 chapters and then dropped down to hard for the rest. I was actually very pleased by the difficulty of the first 2 maps, but quickly realized after that this challenge wasn't for me. Do not attempt maddening unless you have built your unit specifically for Xenologue. In a way, I can definitely understand the appeal for someone who has refined all their engage weapons, given their favorite units the best skills in the game, and maxed out their bond, etc. But the fact that all those unaccountable investments from the main game transfers over to the unscaling and set challenge of Xenologue makes it a frustrating experience for everyone else. The skills and emblem ring combinations you thoughtfully chose in the main game probably won't work here, because everyone is locked to a version of their base class. In fact, many units straight up won't work, period, because of this restriction. Fan favorites such as Louis and Anna are absolutely unusable with the way these maps are designed. I personally feel they should have kept inheritance separate from this mode. After all, that was the whole premise. But now it's this weird contradiction where you're carrying over skills for classes you don't want to use. I'm honestly so disappointed. This had so much potential, and the class system is just so imbalanced. I would have liked to see stronger weapons locked to more situational units, but that would have required a complete difficulty overhaul and some semblance of foresight. The inventory system is terrible. Everyone comes with a set inventory before each map that you will promptly just store in your convoy either way because their setups fucking suck. Every character's inventory resets and changes between maps, so you have to do it every single time. Pandreo is a really good unit to bring to these maps, especially paired with Celica, but his class is locked to B-ranked tomes, and by chapter 4, the game stops giving you L-Fire. This is just one example of how frustrating this system is. Another is that half your units can't even use the battle prep menu, so you have to switch their equipment in maps during gameplay. And yeah, their starting inventory for every single map also fucking sucks. So for all the units that are locked to level 1 bond with your emblem rings and are relegated to utility roles or are just straight up useless, they need to spend an extra turn standing next to a leader to access the convoy, even though they still appear in your barracks and you can equip them with rings. Why? Skill and bond inheritance transferring over is such a detriment to gameplay and exacerbates all these weird balance issues. Your units from the main game are so much exponentially better than the new units that 90% of the game's difficulty is just keeping them alive. This is all due to the fact that the Fell Xenologue is fundamentally tied to your playthrough, and I'm honestly confused as to why they thought this was a good idea. Three Houses Cindered Shadows had similar problems with the gameplay not delivering on the concept, but at least you only had to play through it once. Yes, to get the rewards, aka the content you paid for, you have to play through this campaign every single playthrough. I'm not going to compare the gameplay of Fell Xenologue to Cindered Shadows, because honestly they're both huge disappointments and waste of money, but I do want to compare the implementation of the DLC. Three Houses DLC was completely separate from the main game, and therefore an actual option as to whether you wanted to utilize it in your playthrough. Engage throws resources into your inventory automatically. Things like money and refining materials and seals cannot simply be discarded. The new classes and new units in Three Houses complemented the economy of the main game and didn't supplant any other units or classes. Meanwhile, in Engage, before you even have access to the new rings, you have to complete a map with scaled experience that will absolutely obliterate the challenge of the story, whether you decide to use the ring or not. Difficulty will always be incredibly subjective. For some, the implementation of these resources will ruin the difficulty and their fun, but for others, it will be an invaluable tool for them. I can really only speak for myself. I love more content, and I want to use the DLC because it's fun and it should open up gameplay options. But like I said in the beginning of this video, its implementation is done so unsystematically that it just turns me off, and ultimately makes me less excited to replay one of my favorite games of this year. Also, to use the new Magic Cannon class, it costs 90,000 gold. Why?